Well, when guys get to play against Brock Bowers, they really see what the Georgia tight end is all about. Michigan's Justin Ross, who is getting ready for, excuse me, Josh Ross is getting ready for the NFL draft. And he was asked about Brock Bowers over the weekend in Indianapolis. And he really had some glowing things to say about Brock. He said, watching him on film, it was like three players all year long. He got screens and took them to the crib for like 70 or 80 yards. That's different for as a tight end, a bigger guy to be able to do stuff like that. And he went on to say the way he played as a freshman, that says a lot. Um, the Michigan game, very specifically, was a game where the folks at Georgia felt like Brock Bowers could take advantage of his athleticism against Michigan, and he did. I mean, he really made Michigan. He punished Michigan all night long. It was a good example of just how important a deadly tight end can be, but he's not a normal tight end at all. And I think that's the thing to keep in mind about Brock Bowers is Darnell Washington is probably the better blocker. But in terms of just straight up making plays, it's hard to deny how good Bowers is. Against Michigan, he had 5 catches for 55 yards, and that touchdown where he kind of swept around. It was the first touchdown of the game, and he was just deadly that night in Miami. It's something we talk about in DAWGSTRUCTION a lot. And make sure you're grabbing your copy by checking out the links below to where you can see it. But it was a game where that really showcased Bowers and just how deadly he could be. I actually do not have a picture of Brock from that specific game in the book, but it was this game. It was the one run he was talking about. The Michigan linebacker is this screen against Georgia Tech? I think it was a screen, and he was just gone. I mean, I was in the other end zone because I knew Georgia would score at will against Georgia Tech, and it was just a matter of time before they got down the field. But um, Bowers is such a matchup nightmare, and a linebacker would know. And that's what the Michigan player was talking about was Brock Bowers' ability to change the trajectory of a game with one snap. Think about the Clemson game at the beginning of the season and what Bowers was able to do at the start of that game. Now, remember, we were in the midst of COVID. There was a surge of COVID coming off at the end of the summer. We didn't get the ability to see any practices. And you started hearing through the grapevine, though, that people who were at practices that, yeah, Darnell was good until he got hurt. But Bob Bowers was something to really pay attention to. I had multiple people tell me that. I almost said one of the people's names just now. But uh, one of the people was glowing about him in a way that you don't normally hear that person glow about people. And you can see why now after the fact. But it was the Clemson game where he really hurt Clemson right off the bat. And there was a lot of hand wringing because it's Georgia fans going into that game um, against Clemson because there were a lot of guys out. I mean, remember Darnell was out, George Pickens was out, Akirus Jackson was sidelined, Blaylock was out. I mean, you're talking about a lot of really really good players, several five-star players I just mentioned there. And Brock Bowers immediately comes in, 6 catches, 43 yards, no touchdowns, but he got Georgia rolling immediately. And that was the most catches that he had in the season. It wasn't the most yards. Against UAB, he goes for 107 because he had an 89-yard touchdown. Against Kentucky, he has 101 yards, 5 catches, 27 yard was his long there. 2 touchdowns against Kentucky, 2 against Vanderbilt, 2 against UAB. He has 2 against Charleston Southern. Against Georgia Tech, he goes for 100 yards receiving, of course, with the 77-yard touchdown, two touchdowns there. But it was against Alabama in a losing effort where he had his most catches like Shannon Mitchell against the Gators out there. 10 receptions, excuse me, for 139 yards. He had 11 touches that game. Against Tennessee, he had 3 touches. He went for almost 50 yards in that game. a 24-yard run. There's no shortage of things that the guy can do. I mean, think about the last 5 games that Georgia played. He scored 7 touchdowns. He scored 7 touchdowns. 2 against Charleston Southern, 2 against Tech, and then 1 each against Alabama, Michigan, and Alabama again. So it's not surprising. Listen, I've been a Heisman voter coming on 20 years, not quite 20 years. And he should be at the top of anyone's Heisman list. Top 3. He'll go to New York if he has the same sort of season that he had this last year because honestly, he was under the radar for the bulk of the year. But to go for 56 receptions, 882 yards, 13 touchdowns, y'all, 13 touchdowns receiving, and then another one running. It's just hard to see how much better a football player, than you get than that guy. He is deadly. Um, he is as what's the word? He is as lethal a player as anybody Georgia's had. That he in some times the difference is, and maybe this it helps him and accentuates what he does. Accentuates, excuse me. That he plays tight end means it's hard to guard him. You don't know if he's supposed to block or not. A lot of times Georgia flexes Brock out, so he's not blocking them, but he can be blocking on the edge. And he's really hard to deal with. And as a photographer, you're not going to get tight ends. I mean, that's just something. They're so hard to judge where they're going. You're not going to get tight ends. You're not going to be able to photograph them easily. And a lot of times their passes are interior passes. But with Bowers, he gets into space so easily, you often do get pictures of Brock Bowers. This is not a picture of Brock, but this is Stetson's reaction to throwing that 89-yard touchdown to Brock Bowers in the UAB game. Make sure you're picking up DAWGSTRUCTION. Check it out down below. It may be tagged in this post if you're looking for it as well. He's one of the best players in the country. He's not one of the best. He is the best tight end in the country. The question is he one of the best players in the country? Could you imagine what these practices are like with him going up against, some combination of Devontae and Nakobe at any one time? I'll tell you what. And then Georgia had a long line of really good tight ends. It really started with Larry Brown in the middle 90s. Shannon Mitchell was pretty good too. But Larry was the one that started, and it just didn't stop. It went from Larry to Wiggins to McMichael to Ben Watson, Leonard Pope. Maybe you had a dip for a second there, but I mean Martrez had some pretty bad drops, but he was not a bad tight end at all. Trip Chandler on up to Orson. Aaron White was a really good tight end, to be honest. And then on into Isaac Nana was really good, but this guy is on a different level. It seems like, and I just don't know how to describe him. The adjectives, you kind of run out of adjectives, but he's one of the best players in the country, and he is there. He is very definitely getting a look at my Heisman vote, and I'll be paying close attention to Brock Bowers as the Michigan players did too. They just couldn't catch him. And we'll see you over on the website.